Hey everyone! Tonight we're gonna roll back the clock hundreds of years, to a world where light and shadow intertwined, and survival was a constant grind. Tonight we're not gonna talk about kings or epic battles or magnificent castles. Nah, we're gonna dive into something far more relatable, something every single one of us knows intimately: dinner. More specifically, we're gonna explore what a medieval peasant actually ate. Now, that might sound simple, but I bet you anything it's gonna surprise you. So, come with me, let's slide back in time. Imagine you're Elara, a simple serf woman living in a small village nestled at the foot of some lord's castle. The sun hasn't even dared to peek over the horizon yet, but your stomach's already rumbling after a short night's sleep on a straw mattress. There's no coffee machine whirring, no comforting smell of toasted bagels wafting from the corner store. Your life is an endless cycle of labor, and every single bite you take is a stark reminder of how fragile existence really is. The primary goal of a medieval peasant's meal wasn't enjoyment. Oh no, it was pure, unadulterated fuel. It was the energy you needed to drag your hoe out to the fields before your bones had even thawed out, to till the Lord's land that wasn't even truly yours, to survive the brutal cold of winter and the unforgiving heat of a dry summer. This food had one job and one job only: keep you alive, plain and simple. And here it is, the undisputed star of every meal, the dish that if you were living back then, you'd be eating every single day, probably multiple times a day: pottage. Now, pottage wasn't a specific recipe. It was more of a concept. Think of it as a thick, gloopy soup or porridge, cooked over an open fire for hours, sometimes even all day long. The ingredients, whatever you could get your hands on. Mostly, it was coarse grains, not the fancy white wheat the nobility dreamt about, oh no. We're talking barley, oats, or rye, all boiled down with lentils, peas, or any other legumes you managed to grow. Then you toss in whatever vegetables you had from your garden or foraged from the wild. Cabbage, onions, leeks, turnips, and maybe some carrots. Remember, carrots back then were usually white or pale yellow, not the bright orange beauties we have today. If you were lucky, you might even find some young nettles, purslane, or wild lettuce to add a bit of flavor and some much-needed nutrients. Elara would start her day by rekindling the fire in her earthen hearth, pulling out the heavy iron pot that held the day's pottage. There might be a little leftover from the night before. You never wasted a single spoonful. She'd pour in more water, add a handful of dried beans, a few wilting cabbage leaves, and a pinch of salt, that precious commodity she guarded with her life. That smoky, steamy smell from the pottage pot, that was the scent of home, the smell of sheer survival. The taste of pottage was usually bland, let's be honest, but it was warm, thick, and it filled up that empty belly. It was breakfast, it was lunch, and it formed the base of their dinner. "Oh, pottage again," was probably every kid's catchphrase back then, muttered with a resigned sigh. Accompanying the pottage was coarse bread. Again, don't picture your fluffy baguette or soft sandwich bread. This bread was made from raw, unrefined flour milled from barley, oats, or rye. It was dark, dense, and heavy. Elara would break off a large piece, using it to scoop up the last drops of pottage from her wooden bowl. Sometimes they'd toast it directly on the hot ashes, maybe with a smear of lard if they had a pig and had recently butchered it. This was the original artisanal, whole-grain, gluten-packed bread, a far cry from anything you'd find in a bakery aisle today. And for a drink, forget about clean tap water. Drinking straight from rivers and lakes was a risky business, often leading to sickness. So instead, they drank ale. This was a low-alcohol beer, brewed right there at home from the very grains they grew. It might sound fancy, but it was safer than dubious well water and provided extra calories. Even the children drank a watered-down version of this ale. Who knew? Medieval life was so awesome that even kids got to sip a few sips of beer every day. You wouldn't see that on a modern school lunch menu. So what did a typical day look like for Elara and her family? Well, it wasn't exactly a leisurely stroll in the park. After that humble pottage breakfast, Elara and her husband would head straight to the fields. The sun would be barely peeking over the horizon, casting long shadows across the dew-kissed earth. Their work was backbreaking, plowing with oxen if they were lucky enough to have access to one, sowing seeds by hand, weeding endless rows of crops, and then, the most crucial part, harvesting. Imagine spending 12 to 14 hours a day, bent over in a field, under the scorching summer sun or in the chilling autumn winds. Your body ached, your hands were calloused, and your mind was solely focused on the yield, because that yield directly translated to food for the next year. The children weren't exempt from this labor, either. While they might play simple games with sticks and stones, their childhood was largely about learning to survive. From a young age, Elara's children would be out helping. The older ones might help with weeding or carrying water from the communal well. The younger ones would be taught to identify edible berries and mushrooms, and, crucially, which ones not to eat, unless they fancied a quick trip to the medieval version of an emergency room. They'd gather firewood for the hearth, tend to the few chickens or goats, and learn the rhythms of the seasons. Their education was less about books and more about the practical skills needed to keep the family alive. Life in the village was tightly knit. Peasants lived in close proximity, sharing resources like the communal oven for baking bread or the village mill for grinding grain. There were communal labor days, where everyone pitched in for bigger tasks like digging ditches or repairing the church roof. This meant a constant cycle of interaction, but also a constant awareness of everyone else's struggles and fortunes. There was no privacy, no me time in the modern sense. Your life was intertwined with the village, and your survival often depended on the collective. When it came to food preparation, simplicity was key. You didn't have fancy kitchen gadgets or a pantry full of ingredients. Elara's kitchen was often just a corner of her one-room hut, with a pot over the fire and maybe a few basic wooden utensils. Roasting, boiling, and occasionally frying, if they had enough fat, were the main techniques. Herbs, mostly wild, were used sparingly for flavor or medicinal purposes. Think comfort food, but on a much more basic level. After a long day, a steaming bowl of pottage was all you craved. Evenings were short and simple. After the meal, the family would gather around the fire. There might be storytelling tales of local legends, valiant knights, who were probably nothing like the real ones, or cautionary fables. Sometimes, someone would play a simple tune on a pipe or lute, or they'd sing folk songs passed down through generations. These moments of quiet togetherness were precious, a respite from the relentless toil. Then, early to bed, to rest aching muscles before the sun's first rays signaled another day of labor. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty of survival through the seasons. Spring brought a breath of fresh air and a glimmer of hope. New shoots would emerge, offering fresh greens to supplement the winter diet of dried and preserved foods. It was a time of planting, of hard work, but also of anticipation for the coming harvest. Summer was intense, a period of relentless labor under the sun, tending the crops. Your days were long, your body pushed to its limits. Autumn, oh, glorious autumn. This was harvest time, the culmination of all their efforts. The fields would be heavy with grain, and the excitement was palpable. But autumn also meant tax time, a portion of their hard-earned harvest, sometimes as much as a third or even half, went straight to the Lord. It was a harsh reality, constantly reminding them of their place in the feudal system. And then came winter, the ultimate test. Winter was brutal. The cold seeped into your bones, and food supplies dwindled. If the harvest had been poor, or if taxes had been particularly heavy, starvation became a real and terrifying possibility. They relied heavily on dried vegetables, stored grains, and any preserved meats. Their bodies, weakened by the cold and lack of nutrients, were susceptible to illness. Imagine the constant gnawing fear of not having enough, of seeing your children shiver and grow thin. That's the reality of a medieval winter. When desperate, people would turn to eating tree bark, roots, or anything that could provide even the slightest sustenance. It was a truly desperate time, highlighting the fragility of life. And speaking of fragility, let's talk about disease. The Black Death, which swept through Europe in the mid-14th century, was a stark and horrifying reminder of how quickly life could be extinguished. It wiped out a third to half of Europe's population, profoundly altering the social fabric. But even without major plagues, common illnesses like dysentery, fevers, and infections were constant threats. A simple cut could lead to a fatal infection. Toothaches were agonizing and often led to tooth loss. Malnutrition was widespread, making people vulnerable. Their medicine was a mix of herbal remedies, some effective, some not so much, prayer, and sometimes rather gruesome practices like bloodletting. Superstitions were rampant, with many believing illness was a punishment from God or the work of evil spirits. So, a peasant's fear wasn't just of an empty stomach, but of a fever that could take them away in a matter of days. Culturally, food was deeply intertwined with their beliefs. Farmers would bless their fields and harvests, praying for good weather and abundant yields. There were rituals and festivals tied to the agricultural calendar, planting rituals in spring, harvest festivals in autumn. These were not just fun gatherings. They were vital expressions of their hopes and fears, and a way to reinforce community bonds. Now, let's compare that to the truly extravagant foods of the nobility. These were the things that made a peasant's daily fare seem like something out of a horror movie. Abundant fresh meat, we're talking mountains of it. Not just pork or chicken, but cuts of beef, lamb, and a bewildering array of wild game that only the nobility could hunt: venison, wild boar, rabbit, even swans and peacocks, often roasted whole and presented elaborately. Imagine Elara's eyes if she saw a platter piled high with roasted venison, something that would send her running for the hills just to avoid being accused of poaching. Fine white bread. Forget that dense, dark peasant loaf. The nobility enjoyed bread made from the finest, purest white flour, a symbol of their refined tastes and wealth. It was light, airy, and a stark contrast to the coarse stuff their serfs ate. Imported spices. These were the true gold of the medieval kitchen. Black pepper, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, saffron, bought at exorbitant prices from exotic lands. These weren't just for flavor, they were for show. A noble's dish would be heavily spiced, not necessarily to taste better, sometimes it just tasted spicy, but to flaunt their wealth. You'd never find these in Elara's kitchen. Sugar and honey. Sugar was a true luxury, often used as a spice or a status symbol rather than a common sweetener. Honey was a bit more accessible but still precious. Nobles would sweeten their drinks, desserts, and even some savory dishes. Elara's only sweetener might be the occasional wild berry. Wine. While peasants drank their low-alcohol ale, nobles indulged in various wines, often imported from far-flung vineyards. Wine was a daily staple at their tables, a symbol of refinement and status. Exotic and rare fruits. Oranges, lemons, pomegranates, and dates. These were all imported and incredibly expensive. They were served to impress guests and confirm the host's high standing. Elaborately prepared dishes. Forget simply boiling things in a pot. Noble kitchens had teams of cooks preparing complex, multi-course meals. Dishes were often sculpted into fantastic shapes, dyed vibrant colors, and presented with dramatic flair. They might have a sautelti, an elaborate sugar sculpture, at the end of the meal. A peasant might see this and wonder if it was even edible. Is that a swan wearing a tiny hat? Oh, please tell me they're not going to eat it. So, what's the takeaway from Elara's menu? It's a tale of remarkable frugality, resilience, and a deep connection to the land. Her life was simple, unburdened by consumer choices or flashy advertisements. The best meal, a peasant might have said, is the one that fills your stomach. They found contentment in the basics, celebrating the small victories of a good harvest and enduring the harsh realities of scarcity. Every morning, Elara thanked whatever gods might be listening for the pottage in her pot. Every evening, she cherished the warmth of the fire and the tired but loving faces of her family. Her life, though devoid of what we call luxury, was full of simple truths and an unspoken gratitude for every single bite. It's a reminder that even in the toughest times, humanity finds a way to survive, to connect, and to appreciate the most fundamental things in life. And with that, I hope you appreciate your own dinner tonight, whether it's a gourmet burger or instant ramen. At least you have a choice, right? A choice that Elara could only dream of.